The conflict between heart and ambition. He always believed that his career would be his top priority, the clear goal of his life. Since he was young, he was drawn to the idea of success, of being recognized in the field he had chosen to pursue. His work wasn't just a job, it was his identity, his passion, his purpose. On those days when exhaustion seemed to take him by surprise, he would remember the reasons he had chosen that path. The need to achieve more, to be more. It was hard for him to think about anything other than his professional rise. But at some point, something changed. Maybe it was a simple exchange of glances, a shy smile, or even a casual conversation that in some way awakened something new within him, something he didn't know still existed inside. At first, he tried to ignore it. He had more important priorities, or at least that's what he kept trying to convince himself. But the thought that there could be something more, something that made him question his already set path, stayed on his mind. He wasn't quite sure what was happening, but one thing he was certain of: he was falling in love. He knew this could be complicated, and he knew that his life wasn't just about the heart, but about the relentless logic of achieving more, always more. The problem was that the more he tried to focus on work, the more he felt the weight of the growing desire to be with that person, to explore what could be between them. He tried to convince himself that he could move forward without straying from his professional trajectory, but as time went on, he realized that this task was becoming increasingly difficult. But what exactly was at stake here? He couldn't just dive into the relationship without a second thought, without weighing the consequences. After all, his career was at a crucial point. He couldn't take any risks, not when he was so close to achieving the results he had worked his whole life for. Moreover, this wasn't just a matter of time. It was a matter of compatibility. He couldn't help but think that the relationship, with all its potential for happiness and personal fulfillment, could become a stumbling block on his professional path. Was it possible to reconcile these two aspects? Or would one of them end up being sacrificed? He knew what most people would think. Just maintain a balance, find a way to make both coexist. But he felt uncomfortable with that idea. He knew his commitment to his career wasn't something flexible. He had put so much effort, so much sweat, so much of his soul into it, that the thought of letting something distract him seemed unthinkable. And deep down, he knew that this something wasn't just anything. It was something with the potential to change him completely. In those lonelier moments, he questioned whether he was being too rigid with himself. Why couldn't he simply allow the two worlds to connect in some way? But at the same time, he feared the possibility of losing something important, something he had never known he wanted until that moment. The uncertainty about the future became increasingly distressing. And so, as his mind wrestled between two extremes, the desire to advance his career and the growing attraction to what could be a love story, he felt increasingly distant from any kind of clarity. He wanted so much to be successful, but at the same time, he didn't know if he could keep ignoring the feelings that were now consuming him. What was more important? Stability and professional success? Or the risk of surrendering to the unpredictable, to what was beyond the control of his spreadsheets and deadlines? Unplanned love work had always been the priority. Ever since he entered that corporate environment, he knew he had a place to claim. The competition was fierce, the atmosphere relentless, but he remained steadfast. Everything was always planned and calculated. His steps were taken with the precision of a Swiss watch, always focused on the sole goal, reaching the top. And then he met that person. He could never have predicted the impact she would have on his life. At first, it was just a casual encounter. Nothing special, or so it seemed. A conversation, a laugh, an exchange of ideas. But soon he realized that there was something about her that drew him in. It was more than just looks or charisma. It was something deeper, something he couldn't define. But that pulled him in, and he couldn't resist. He tried to keep his focus. No distractions, he told himself. But the more he tried to concentrate, the heavier the weight of his own feelings became. The way he smiled when he saw her, how his heart raced during the simplest moments, how his hands trembled slightly when she touched him, even if just innocently. All of this was something he could no longer ignore. It was when he began to question the very logic of his life. If love, that spontaneous feeling, could be so impactful, was it possible that he was overlooking something that could change his life in ways he had never imagined? Something that could bring even deeper meaning to his journey. He didn't know for sure, but he couldn't deny that her presence was starting to take on an important place in his life. As much as his work was his obsession, as much as his career was his reason for being, he felt there was something there that he couldn't just let slip by. Something that could be more valuable than any award or recognition. Something that could be the balancing element he had never realized he needed. The weight of decisions. While he tried to focus on work, emotions seemed to rise up from the depths of his mind like relentless waves. When he was in the meeting room, at the center of his professional world, the conversations and numbers were clear. He felt in control. But soon after, when the lights dimmed and he was left alone with his thoughts, deeper questions began to haunt him. The love he felt started to interfere with the little things, daily choices, the way he envisioned the future. His co-workers had already started to notice how distracted he was. He tried to hide it, but he couldn't fool anyone. The curious glances, the casually posed questions, all of it made him feel uncomfortable. How could he continue to pretend that he was immune to all of this? How could he keep acting like nothing had changed, when in reality each day he found himself more entangled between two completely different worlds? He felt torn, as if he were living between two versions of himself. On one side, the dedicated professional, the ambitious one, the determined one. On the other, the man who found himself touched by a deep feeling, longing for something beyond material success, something that transcended numbers and targets. He tried to rationalize, seeking a logical answer, but he knew the issue didn't have an easy solution, and there, in light of all this, he felt a fear he never imagined he would have, the fear of losing control. The fear that by giving in to love, he would be jeopardizing his career, his goals, and his identity. And more than that, the fear that this relationship, even if wonderful, might become a burden, an obstacle that would prevent him from achieving what he had always wanted. But there was another part of him, the part that felt, that dreamed, that he simply couldn't ignore. He knew that life was full of tough choices, and this one might be the hardest of all. If he decided to follow his heart, he would risk everything he had built so far. He would have to deal with the possibility that romance and career might not be compatible. But on the other hand, what would happen if he chose his career and left love behind? Would he be happier? Or would he instead find himself wondering what could have been, lamenting the lost opportunity? The tension between these two forces, love and ambition, continued to grow within him, like a knot tightening with each passing day. He couldn't find a simple solution. Ambition urged him to want more, to reach the top, but at the same time love called to him, offering something deeper, more human, something he never knew he needed. He didn't know how long he could ignore that attraction, that connection, the illusion of containment. Over time, he realized that his attempt to keep these two realities separate was becoming increasingly impossible. Sometimes he found himself looking at her during meetings or social events, and instead of paying attention to what was being said, he got lost in the unspoken words between them. He tried to control himself, to rationalize everything, but his mind and heart could no longer follow the same path. Work continued, the demands increased, and he found himself becoming more and more absorbed in his responsibilities. However, behind the professional facade, his emotional reality began to take shape. He started to feel that with each new step he took in his career, he was getting further away from something that could truly be important to him, a genuine and true love, something that he felt could bring meaning to his life. And there he was, on the edge of an abyss that he didn't know if he was ready to cross. The tension between the desire to fulfill his professional dreams and the need to live something deeper grew stronger. He knew he couldn't keep living this way, living a lie, but he also knew he couldn't afford to give up the career he had longed for. He was at the limit of what he could endure. Any wrong step could be fatal, but he didn't know what the right path was. The illusion that he could control everything, that he could separate these two spheres of his life, began to crumble. He could no longer ignore the reality. What he felt was not something fleeting, something that could simply be set aside. It was real, it was intense, and it was growing stronger by the day. And so, over time, he began to understand something he had tried to deny until then. Love wasn't something he could simply put aside. He could try to ignore his feelings, but they would return stronger and more persistent. He could attempt to prioritize his career, but at some point, he would have to choose between pursuing his passion or sticking to his job. The encounter of choice. It was on a quiet evening after a long day at work that he finally found himself alone with his thoughts. Sitting in his office with the city lights shining outside, he sat in silence, staring at his computer screen, but not really seeing it. What he saw was a version of himself he didn't want to face. A man torn between two worlds that seemed incompatible, unable to make a decision. He thought about the years he had dedicated to his work, all the sweat, all the sleepless nights, all the choices that had brought him to this point. He didn't want to abandon everything he had built, not at all. But at the same time, he wondered if it was possible to live a fulfilling life without making space for what his heart truly desired. He knew that the future wasn't something he could fully control. Sometimes paths crossed in unexpected ways, and the real choice wasn't between what was right or wrong, but between what was possible and what was truly wanted. In that moment, he realized he wasn't just asking himself if he could reconcile his career with love. He was questioning what truly mattered to him. What would be enough? Material success or something deeper, more lasting? He understood that at some point he would have to make a decision, and what scared him the most was the possibility that by choosing his career, he might somehow be choosing to lose the chance to be happy in a way he never imagined was possible. The weight of decision. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. He tried to focus on work, but the distractions were relentless. Every time she was nearby, the weight of her presence seemed to intensify the internal doubt he felt. He knew the situation was becoming unsustainable. The longer he took to make a decision, the more confusing the path ahead would become. In his moments of reflection, he questioned whether love should be a priority. After all, he had always heard that to be truly successful, one must make sacrifices and set certain aspects of life aside. He had chosen his career because he believed that professional success would be the only form of fulfillment. Yet at the same time, there was a part of him that didn't know how to ignore the person who seemed destined to show him another facet of life, one he never imagined he could live. He felt as if he was sinking into a kind of existential paradox. If he chose love, he would have to give up the stability his career provided. If he chose his career, he would lose something that, at least for a moment, seemed even more important. He thought that maybe, over time, he could balance both. But he couldn't see how that would be possible without sacrificing something fundamental. Each night, he wondered, could he truly be happy in a life without her, even with all the success his career could bring? The next morning, with a tired face, he sat down at his desk, trying to concentrate on an important new project. But his mind was elsewhere. He tried to avoid thoughts of her, but he couldn't. The dilemma in his mind was becoming increasingly clear: continue down his relentless professional path, or give in to what his heart seemed to be asking for, a love that could take him away from everything he had built. And it was in that moment, while looking at the graphs and reports, that he realized that perhaps the biggest barrier wasn't what he thought he would lose. What he truly feared was discovering himself to be someone different from who he imagined he was. If, by following the path of love, he would transform into a person he could no longer recognize. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes for a moment, contemplating all the possibilities. One thing was certain: he could not continue living in this limbo, trying to deceive himself into believing that everything could be maintained. He knew that sooner or later he would have to make a choice, and now he finds himself on the brink of a decision that could change the course of his life: the career he fought so hard to achieve, or the love that unexpectedly arrived to reshape his vision of the future. What would you do in his place? Leave your thoughts in the comments on what you think he should choose. Is there a way to balance both? Or is love always a risk that should be set aside in the name of success?